At Dad's Will Reading, my brothers laughed when I got the worthless gas station. Enjoy your junk pile, little sister. But when I found the hidden safe behind Dad's old desk and saw what was inside, the real estate developers started calling. My name is Jenna Walker and I'm 31 years old. The lawyer's office felt like a cage, a very expensive cage with plush carpet, dark mahogany wood, and air so clean and filtered it felt wrong to breathe. It was the kind of place where grief was supposed to be neat and tidy, packed away in a briefcase at the end of the meeting. My brothers, Brandon and Cole, sat across the polished table from me. They were in their natural habitat, wearing suits that probably cost more than my truck. Brandon, my older brother and a swaggering real estate mogul, couldn't sit still, tapping a gold pen against the table in a rhythm of pure impatience. Cole, my other older brother and a corporate lawyer, was the opposite. He was perfectly still, his face a blank mask, just staring at the stack of paperwork as if he could make the lawyer read faster through sheer force of will. They looked bored, like they were waiting for a transaction to be completed so they could get back to their important lives. Finally, Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer, a man who looked like he'd been born in a gray suit, cleared his throat and began to read from my dad's will. His voice was a dry monotone, sucking all the life out of my father's last words. For Brandon Walker, $100,000. For Cole Walker, $100,000. Brandon's pen stopped tapping. Cole gave a slight, satisfied nod. It was what they expected. Clean, simple cash. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses. And for my daughter Jenna Walker, he read, I leave Walker's service and gas, the property and business, lock, stock, and barrel. A laugh escaped Brandon. It wasn't a big, hearty laugh, just a short, sharp puff of air full of derision. A junk pile, he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Perfect. Cole didn't laugh. He just shook his head slowly, a tiny, pitying smile playing on his lips. It was the look he'd been giving me my whole life, the one that said, "Oh, Jenna, still playing with your little toys." I didn't say a word, I didn't look at them. My insides felt hollowed out, the grief a cold, heavy thing in my chest. I just focused on the set of old, greasy keys Mr. Abernathy pushed across the vast, empty space of the table toward me. The metal was cool against my skin. They felt more real, more substantial than my brother's stacks of cash ever could. As we walked out of the silent office building and back into the noise of the city, Brandon slung an arm around my shoulder. It was meant to look brotherly, but it felt heavy, possessive. "What are you going to do with that relic, Jen?" he asked, his tone dripping with a false concern that was more insulting than his laughter had been. I shrugged his arm off. "I'll figure it out," I said, my voice quiet. He clapped me on the shoulder, a hard, dismissive pat. "Well, you know where to find me. Call me when you're ready to sell the land for scrap. I've got a guy who can clear it for you. I'll even get you a few grand for it." A few grand? For the place my grandfather had built, the place my father had poured his entire soul into, the place where I'd spent every summer of my childhood. The insult was so sharp it felt like a physical blow. Cole stepped up, ever the pragmatist, and handed me his pristine business card. The lettering was embossed. "If you need help with the paperwork to liquidate, I'll give you the family rate," he said smoothly. Liquidate? They talked about it like it was an overstocked warehouse, not a home. They didn't see the legacy, the memories baked into the grease-stained concrete. They saw a liability, a final, inconvenient burden Dad had saddled me with. To them, it was just one last mess for them to clean up or, in my case, for me to drown in. They walked away without another word, getting into their matching black luxury cars, the engines purring to life in perfect, expensive unison. They drove off, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk with the city rushing around me. I looked down at my hands. They were calloused, the knuckles scarred from a slipped wrench here and there. There was a faint, dark line of engine grease under my nails that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully remove. These hands had taken engines apart and put them back together. They knew how things worked. In my palm were the keys. One for the front door of the station's little convenience store, one for the office, and the big, heavy one for the main garage bay. I closed my fist around them, the metal edges digging into my skin. I remembered Dad telling me over and over whenever I was stumped by a busted engine or a stripped bolt, "Everything has a purpose, Jenna, you just have to be willing to look under the hood." It was his favorite saying, his answer for everything. It felt like he was saying it to me right now. The drive to the old station was quiet, a lonely trip down a road that time had forgotten. The new highway hummed 2 miles to the east, a constant river of traffic that had rerouted the lifeblood of this place years ago, starving it to death one car at a time. I pulled my old pickup truck to a stop next to Pump 3, the one Dad always said was the most reliable, the one he'd calibrated by hand every month. Weeds, bold and green, grew through the deep cracks in the pavement. The big sign on the pole out front, "Walker's Service," was faded, the paint peeling. Half the neon letters had gone dark years ago, leaving a ghostly suggestion of our family name against the sky. Unlocking the front door felt like opening a tomb. The key was stiff in the lock. The hinge groaned in protest, a sound like a tired old man. The air that rushed out to meet me was still and thick, smelling of dust, stale coffee, and the faint, familiar, comforting scent of motor oil. It smelled like my dad. Sunlight struggled through the grimy front windows, cutting long, hazy shafts through the darkness. Millions of dust motes danced in the light, a silent, swirling galaxy. I ran my hand over the worn Formica counter, its surface scarred with decades of coffee cups and signed receipts. This was where Dad had spent thousands of hours, leaning on his elbows, talking about the weather or the local high school football team with anyone who stopped by. This place wasn't a junk pile to me. My brothers could have their cash, their clean hands, their soulless city offices. This place was the last piece of my father I had left. It was a library of his life, and I was its only keeper. I wasn't going to let anyone tear it down. I wasn't going to let them erase him. I had to find a way to save it. That was the only thought in my head. In the small, cramped back office, I found the books. They were piled in a cardboard box on the floor next to the desk, not neatly filed away. Dad had never been great with paperwork. The reality was worse than I thought. The station wasn't just quiet, it was bleeding out. I sorted through the papers under the weak glow of the single dusty light bulb. There was a thick stack of unpaid bills for electricity, property taxes, and a half-dozen different parts suppliers. Some of the invoices had "final notice" stamped on them in an angry red ink that seemed to shout from the page. I found the business checkbook and the latest bank statement. The station's account had less than $2,000 in it. It wouldn't even be enough to cover the electric bill, and then I saw the other stack of letters from the bank, notices for the line of credit. My heart sank as I read through them. Dad had borrowed $92,000 over the last few years, a little at a time, just to keep the lights on, to keep paying his people. The most recent letter was a formal request for a meeting to discuss the outstanding balance. He'd hidden the depth of the trouble from me, too proud to admit he was drowning. The old rotary phone on the desk suddenly jangled, the sound so loud in the silence it made me jump. I picked it up, my voice hesitant. It was Luke Parker, one of the 2 part-timers Dad had kept on. He was a good kid, just trying to get by. He asked, his voice full of uncertainty, if he and Mia Brooks, the cashier, should come in for their shifts. I looked at the pathetic number on the bank statement. I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him there was no money, no work. "No, Luke," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Take the week off. It'll be paid. I'll call you." After I hung up, I immediately logged into my personal bank account on my phone and transferred enough money to cover their paychecks. My own savings account, the one I was building to maybe one day open my own custom shop, took a major hit. The weight of it all settled on me like a physical thing. I wasn't just inheriting a building, I was inheriting a mountain of debt and the responsibility for 2 people's livelihoods. My brothers got $100,000 free and clear. I got a hole to dig myself out of. My cell phone buzzed on the desk, a jarring modern sound in the old office. The screen lit up with Brandon's name. My stomach tightened into a knot. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I knew he'd just keep calling. I took a breath and answered. Hey sis, had a chance to look at the mess yet? No hello, no how are you holding up, just straight to the point as always. I'm here now, I said, keeping my voice flat. I'm handling it. Look, he said, his voice dropping into a tone that was supposed to sound helpful and confidential. I know you're overwhelmed. I've got a buddy who buys distressed commercial properties. He'll take it off your hands. $5,000, cash, quick and clean. $5,000 for 3 acres of land, the building, a 4-bay garage full of professional-grade tools. For my father's entire life's work. The insult was so profound, so dismissive, it almost took my breath away. He wasn't trying to help me, he was trying to fleece me, assuming I was too stupid or too grief-stricken to know any better. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as solid as steel. It didn't tremble. He sighed, a long, drawn-out sound full of exaggerated patience. It was the sound he made when I was a kid and didn't understand one of his business explanations. Jenna, don't be sentimental, it's a money pit. The land's worthless with that old building on it. That's your only offer, take it. The anger was a slow burn, hot and clean. It's not for sale, I said, and I hung up before he could say another word. The click of the phone ending the call was one of the most satisfying sounds I'd ever heard. The silence that followed the call was deafening, broken only by the hum of the old soda machine in the storefront. I had to get out of that office. I stood up and walked into the main garage bay, my boots echoing on the concrete floor. The air in here was different, thick with the scent of gasoline, solvent, and old metal. This was my sanctuary. This was my real home. The massive hydraulic lift stood silent in the center bay, its arms reaching up like a sleeping giant. The rolling toolbox, a beast of red steel that Dad had bought me for my 25th birthday, was parked against the far wall. This was a place where problems had solutions, where you could use your hands and your head to make something broken work again. I walked over to Dad's old workbench. It was cluttered with half-finished projects and engine parts in dusty cardboard boxes, each with a handwritten tag identifying what it was and what was wrong with it. He was a meticulous man in his own chaotic way. He loved puzzles, codes, leaving little notes for himself. He saw patterns in everything. He used to tell me, the answer is always right in front of you. People just don't know how to look. My eyes scanned the garage, a space I knew as well as my own bedroom. I saw the gray metal filing cabinet I'd seen 1,000 times before, tucked away in a corner. But today, something was different. My eye caught a tiny fleck of color. On the corner of the bottom drawer was a hand-painted red star, no bigger than my fingernail, almost lost in the grime and scratches. I froze. It was his old system. When I was a kid helping him organize invoices, he had a color code. Blue for suppliers, green for taxes, and red was special. Red star meant important family history. It meant this wasn't just about the business. This was about us. I crossed the garage and knelt in front of it. I pulled on the handle. The drawer screeched open, fighting me the whole way. It was stuffed to bursting with old invoices, tax returns from the 90s, and property deeds from decades ago. It looked like a chaotic mess, but right in the middle of it all, I saw a few manila folders where the tabs had been circled in the same red pen. It was a start. It was a clue. He'd left me a trail to follow. I spent the next 2 days living in that dusty office, fueled by lukewarm coffee from an old thermos I found in a cupboard. I barely slept. I spread the contents of the red-circled files across Dad's desk. The papers fanned out like a complicated game of solitaire. I was searching for a pattern, a connection, anything that would tell me what he was trying to show me. Most of the documents were what they seemed, old invoices for regular station business, fuel deliveries, parts orders. But a few of them had strange, cryptic notes scribbled in the margins in Dad's familiar handwriting. On an invoice for a new set of tires from 1988, he'd written, "Check parcel 7B alignment." On a property tax bill from 1995, there was a note that just said, "Query County Records." Pre-1985 survey. They were breadcrumbs left in his own private code. It was exactly his style. He never made anything easy, but he always made it fair. He believed you appreciated the answer more if you had to work for it. I dug deeper into the filing cabinet and found a tube of old property maps in the very bottom, brittle with age. I carefully unrolled them on the floor and started cross-referencing his notes. Every single one seemed to relate to the precise borders of our land. He seemed obsessed with it, especially the scrubby, unused backlot where nothing grew but weeds and a few rusted-out car frames sat sinking into the dirt. It felt like I was piecing together a puzzle he'd left just for me. It was a strange, sad, but powerful feeling. It was like I was having one last conversation with him. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a flicker of real purpose, a sense of mission that cut through the fog of grief. He was talking to me through these papers, telling me to look closer. In one of the folders, I found a series of receipts, all for land surveys. There were 5 of them from 5 different companies, but they were all for the same piece of land, our land. They spanned a period of 20 years. Why would he keep paying to have the same property surveyed over and over again? This wasn't just bookkeeping. This was a long-term, secret project. Just as I was starting to feel like I was getting somewhere, a certified letter arrived. The mail carrier had to knock on the glass door to get my attention. The crisp, official envelope felt heavy in my hand. It was a notice of delinquency on the property taxes. I had 60 days to pay the county or they would place a lien on the station. The amount was in the 4-figure range, money I absolutely did not have. The clock was ticking, louder now. The next day, a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled into the lot, its polished paint job a stark contrast to the faded asphalt. Brandon got out looking annoyed to be there, but he wasn't alone. He was with the same man from before, the one who had looked at me with cold, assessing eyes. Brandon didn't even knock this time, just walked right in like he owned the place, which I suppose he thought he would soon enough. "Jenna," he said, his voice clipped. "This is Nate Collins, he's an associate of mine." Nate Collins, the lawyer, offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We just want to talk," he said, his voice smooth and placating. They weren't here for a friendly chat. This was an intimidation tactic. They saw me there, surrounded by boxes of old files, looking tired and worn down. They looked at each other with knowing smirks. They thought I was at my breaking point. "We know you're in a tough spot," Brandon started, gesturing vaguely at the pile of bills and the tax notice I'd left on my desk. He'd clearly done his homework. "The offer is now $30,000, we're being generous. Call it a payment for the headache." He said the word headache like he was doing me a monumental favor, like he was a king offering a peasant a crust of bread. $30,000. It was a joke, but they weren't laughing. Nate Collins slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a purchase agreement, already filled out with the property details and the insulting price. All it needed was my signature at the bottom. "This is a very generous offer, Miss Walker," Nate said smoothly, his lawyerly voice filling the small office. "It would clear your debts with the county and the bank and leave you with a nice nest egg to start over somewhere else." Start over. This was my home. The idea that I would just take some cash and walk away from my father's legacy, from my own history, was unthinkable. I looked from the paper to Brandon's smug face. He was so sure of himself. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I was stupid and desperate and would just roll over. He'd underestimated me my entire life, and he was doing it again. I slowly, deliberately pushed the paper back across the desk toward them. "The answer is still no," I said. Brandon's face tightened, the friendly facade crumbling away to reveal the cold anger beneath. "Don't be an idiot, Jenna. This is the last time we ask nicely." He and Nate turned and left, the threat hanging in the air like exhaust fumes. The slam of the office door echoed in the quiet station. I was no longer just sad, I was no longer just grieving. I was angry. They didn't just want the station, they wanted it badly, and I was going to find out exactly why. After Brandon and his lawyer left, I stood in the office, my frustration boiling over into a raw, restless energy. I stared at Dad's old desk, at the cheap, dark wood paneling on the wall behind it. I remembered him spending hours sitting right here, often just staring at that wall. I'd always thought he was just tired, lost in thought after a long day. Now I wondered if he wasn't just looking at the wall but at something in it. I walked over and ran my hands along the panels, feeling the slightly greasy texture of the old wood veneer. I was searching for anything out of the ordinary, a loose edge, a hidden switch. My fingers snagged on a tiny imperfection, a hairline crack where two of the panels met. It was almost invisible, a seam so fine that you'd never notice it unless you were looking for it. I pushed on it, nothing happened. I tried to slide it, it didn't budge. I knocked on the paneling, my knuckles making a dull thudding sound. Thud, 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 and then, in one spot, thunk. It was a different sound, a hollow sound. My heart started pounding against my ribs. This was it. This had to be what all those clues, all those cryptic notes in the files were pointing to. I went into the garage and came back with a heavy-duty pry bar and a flashlight. I wedged the tip of the bar into the hairline seam and leaned into it with all my weight. The old paneling creaked, then groaned loudly, and finally, with a sharp crack, the nails holding it in place popped loose. Behind it was not just a wall, but the dull gray metal door of a wall safe set deep into the concrete block. It was old, solid, and serious. My breath caught in my throat. This was the heart of the mystery. This was the answer. It had a single combination dial in the center. I had no idea what the code could be. I knelt on the dusty floor in front of the safe, the smell of old concrete and hidden things filling the small space. I tried all the obvious numbers first: Dad's birthday, Mom's birthday, my own, the station's address. The year he opened the business. Nothing worked. The dial just kept spinning, the lock staying stubbornly shut. I sat back on my heels, defeated, staring at the cold metal dial. I thought about Dad and his love of puzzles, his way of thinking. He never did things the easy way. The combination wouldn't be something simple. It would be something that meant something only to him, or maybe only to me. His voice echoed in my mind, that old familiar phrase, "The answer is always right in front of you." My eyes scanned the office, searching for inspiration, for another clue. They landed on a single framed photograph on the corner of the desk. It was the only personal item he kept there. It was a picture of me when I was 16, standing next to the first engine I ever rebuilt all by myself. I was covered head to toe in grease, but I was grinning from ear to ear, holding up a greasy wrench like it was a trophy. Dad had been so proud of me that day. He'd taken the picture himself with his old camera. He said it was the day I officially became a better mechanic than he was. I picked up the frame. It was heavy, made of dark wood. I turned it over. On the cardboard backing, written in his neat, steady handwriting, was the date. 8/14/98. August 14th, 1998, the day I proved myself. My hands started to shake. I got up and went back to the safe. With trembling fingers, I reached for the dial. I spun it carefully. Right to 8, past 0, left to 14, past 0 again, right to 98. I held my breath. Click. The sound was loud and solid, a definitive mechanical snap that echoed in the silent office. It worked. I grabbed the small metal handle and pulled. The heavy door groaned open, complaining after years of being sealed shut. Inside, sitting alone on a metal shelf, was a thick, sealed manila envelope. On the front, in my father's familiar handwriting, were two simple words: "For Jenna." I carried the envelope over to the desk, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it steady. I sat down in Dad's old squeaky chair and carefully tore open the flap. Inside, there were two things. The first was a short letter written on a piece of the station's letterhead. It was just a few sentences. "Jenna," it read, "you're the one who will understand. You always saw the real value in things, not just the price tag. This is for you. Be smart, be strong. Love, Dad." Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring his familiar handwriting. He knew, he trusted me. He'd left this whole elaborate puzzle for me and me alone. Underneath the letter was a stack of official-looking documents, thick with dense legal language, deeds, surveys. I started to leaf through them. They were mineral rights purchases, 9 of them made between 1975 and 1983. The legal terms were confusing, but the maps attached were clear as day. They all corresponded to the land the station was on and the empty, useless lot behind it. He hadn't just bought the land, he'd spent a fortune buying what was underneath it. According to the receipts stapled to the deeds, he'd spent over $300,000 on these rights decades ago. The final document was the newest. It was a geological survey, stamped and signed, dated just 5 years ago. It showed a detailed satellite map of our property with a large, shaded area highlighted in red. The report attached described it as a massive, untapped pocket of natural gas located directly under our land. I didn't know exactly what it was worth, but I knew it was a lot. And I knew, with a certainty that was cold and hard in the pit of my stomach, that this was the reason my brothers were suddenly so interested in my junk pile. I carefully placed everything back in the envelope. The game had changed. This wasn't about saving a failing business anymore. This was my fight now. I knew immediately that I was out of my depth. I could rebuild a transmission in my sleep, but mineral rights deeds and geological surveys were a foreign language. I couldn't fight my brothers and their high-priced lawyers alone. I needed an expert, but more than that, I needed an ally. I needed someone I could trust completely. The first and only name that came to mind was Mark Ruiz, an environmental engineer for the county. He and Dad had been friends for 40 years, ever since they were young men. He was one of the few people Dad truly trusted. Mark was a good man, honest to a fault. I found his number in Dad's old Rolodex and called him. My voice was tight when I asked if I could come by his office, telling him only that it was about my father. He told me to come right over. His office was a wonderful, cluttered mess of topographical maps, soil samples in glass jars, and teetering stacks of environmental reports. It smelled like dirt and old paper, a smell of real work. Mark greeted me with a sad, kind smile. He was a big man with a gentle face. "Jenna, I was so sorry to hear about Frank," he said, his voice rumbling. "He was a good man, stubborn as a mule, but a good man." I appreciated the sympathy, but I didn't have time for small talk. I laid the thick manila envelope on his desk and pushed it toward him. "Mark, Dad left me this," I said. "I need you to tell me what it means, in plain English." He put on his reading glasses and opened the envelope, his eyebrows raised as he sifted through the old deeds. He let out a low whistle when he saw the survey. He carefully spread the large survey map out on his desk, his expression shifting from friendly curiosity to professional shock. He traced the shaded red area with his finger, his mouth slightly open. "Jenna," he said, his voice hushed as he looked up at me over the top of his glasses. "Where in the world did you get this?" Mark spent the next hour explaining everything to me. He took the complicated technical jargon and broke it down into simple terms I could understand. He explained that the mineral rights meant Dad owned not just the surface of the land, but everything underneath it, all the way down. He confirmed that the geological survey was legitimate and professionally done. The industry, he said, would call a find like this the Walker Pocket. He explained that it was a massive, easily accessible reservoir of natural gas. Finally, I worked up the courage to ask the question that was almost too big to say out loud. "What's it worth?" Mark leaned back in his creaking office chair and took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He stared at the map for a long moment before answering. "Conservatively, in extraction rights alone, meaning you just sell a company the right to come in and drill, you're looking at somewhere between $48 and $55 million. The number didn't feel real. $50 million? It was an amount of money I couldn't even properly imagine. The air in the room suddenly felt thin. I felt lightheaded, and my brothers, my own flesh and blood, had tried to buy it from me for $5,000. The anger I'd felt before was nothing compared to this. This was a cold, clear fury. This wasn't just business. This was a profound betrayal, a theft not just of money but of my father's trust, of our family itself. Mark's face was serious. "A discovery of this size, news travels fast in this industry, Jenna. There are ways of finding this stuff out. People are going to come for this land. Hard." I drove back to the station in a complete daze. The whole world looked different, sharper, more defined. Every rock on the side of the road, every patch of weeds on the property seemed to be hiding a secret. I felt like I'd been living my life in black and white and someone had just flipped a switch to brilliant, blinding color. I sat in the dusty office, the $50 million truth sitting like a stone in my gut. My whole purpose had shifted on its axis. My goal was no longer just to save the station from bankruptcy, it was to claim what was rightfully mine. It was to honor the secret legacy my father had so carefully, so patiently built for me. To do that, I had to become someone my brothers would never expect. I couldn't be the greasy mechanic anymore, not just the quiet little sister they always dismissed. I had to become the one in charge, the one who made the rules. This meant war, I knew it. A war against my own family and their powerful, predatory friends. There was no going back to the way things were. I took a deep, shuddering breath and let it out slowly. I accepted the cost. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but my resolve was like fire burning it away. I would not sell, I would not back down, I would not be intimidated. My new goal formed in my mind, clear and simple. I wasn't just going to keep the land. I was going to develop it myself on my own terms, and I would make them all watch. Mark's warning came true faster than I could have possibly imagined. Maybe Brandon had spies in the county records office, or maybe he just got impatient waiting for me to crumble. 2 days later, a pair of expensive black SUVs pulled into the station lot, their tires crunching on the gravel with an arrogant sound. They looked like alien spaceships parked against the backdrop of rust and peeling paint. Brandon and his lawyer, Nate Collins, got out of the first one. 2 other men in sharp, dark suits emerged from the second. One was older, maybe in his 60s, with perfectly styled silver hair and a look of cold, unshakable authority. The other was younger, clutching a briefcase, his eyes constantly scanning, taking everything in. Brandon walked into the office without knocking, that triumphant smirk back on his face. He thought this was his victory lap. Jenna. "We need to talk," he announced. "This is Victor Hale, the Chief Executive Officer of Easton Ridge Development." Victor Hale, I'd seen his face on billboards and in business magazines. His company was one of the biggest, most aggressive developers in the state. They were famous for steamrolling small landowners and getting whatever they wanted. They didn't come here to negotiate, they came here to close the deal. They crowded into the small office, their expensive suits and cologne making the space feel even smaller. They thought this show of force, this wall of money and power, would be enough to intimidate me into finally signing their papers. They had absolutely no idea that I already knew the secret they were trying to buy. We all stood there in the cramped office. Victor Hale, the CEO, looked around at the dusty shelves and the water-stained ceiling tiles with an expression of open disgust, as if he was afraid of getting dirty just by breathing the air. "Miss Walker," he began, his voice smooth and deep, a voice practiced in boardrooms and shareholder meetings. "Your brother tells me you have a sentimental attachment to this place. I can appreciate that." He said it, but his eyes told me he couldn't appreciate it at all. He continued his perfectly rehearsed speech. "But sentimental value doesn't pay the bills, does it? Easton Ridge Development is prepared to offer you $30,000 as a gesture of goodwill to help you relocate and move on." It was the exact same offer from before. They were playing a game, testing me, trying to see if I'd fold under the pressure of having the big boss in the room. I just looked at him. I didn't say a single word. I let the silence hang in the air, stretching it out until it became uncomfortable for them. I watched their confidence waver just a little. Brandon shifted on his feet, his annoyance showing. "Jenna, don't be difficult." I kept my eyes locked on Victor Hale. "That's not a serious offer." Hale's thin smile was all business. The fake friendliness was gone. "All right, you're tougher than you look, I'll give you that. $500,000, he said, the number snapping through the air like a whip. "You sign today, right now, that's my final offer, take it or leave it." He was trying to shock and awe me, to create a sense of panic, of missing out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. $500,000 was life-changing money. It was also, as I now knew, less than 1% of what the land was actually worth. It was a predator's offer designed to look like a rescue. They thought I was a fool. I looked at the four of them, the expensive suits, the perfect hair, the smug set of Brandon's mouth, and thought about Dad's hands, cracked and stained, wrapping mine around a wrench for the first time. I thought about standing on a milk crate so I could reach the bench grinder and how he'd laughed with pride when I got it right. I kept my voice steady and my face calm. "No," I said. "The property is not for sale." Victor Hale's eyes narrowed just a fraction, like someone had flicked a switch behind them. He wasn't used to being told no, not by people like me. Brandon's face reddened so fast I could see the flush crawl up his neck. "Are you crazy?" he snapped. $500,000, Jenna, what is wrong with you?" His voice cracked on the last word. It sounded like panic dressed as anger. I didn't give him the satisfaction of looking rattled. I walked to the door, flipped the old open sign to closed, and then held the door open for them like they were just customers who'd stayed too long. "I think this meeting is over," I said. Nate Collins stepped forward, that pleasant, empty smile back on his face. "Miss Walker," he said softly, "you should seriously reconsider. There are other ways to acquire property." The words were sweet. The threat inside them wasn't. The younger man with the briefcase started to slide a business card onto my counter like he was slipping a tip to a waiter. I nudged it back to him with 2 fingers. "No thanks." Victor Hale adjusted his cufflinks like the whole place offended him. "We'll be in touch," he said. He made it sound like a promise and a warning. They filed out. Brandon was last. He paused in the doorway and stared at me like he didn't recognize the person in front of him. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed. "You're going to lose everything." "Maybe," I said, and I shut the door. The deadbolt slid into place with a heavy click that echoed in the empty station. My hand stayed on the cool metal for a long beat. I felt the adrenaline buzzing under my skin like I'd stuck my finger in a socket. When I finally let go, my palm was damp with sweat. I could see my reflection in the glass, tired eyes, grease on my cheek, set jaw. I'd drawn the line and they'd seen it. Outside, the SUVs idled for a second, then pulled away, taillights shrinking to red pinpricks against the gray afternoon. The lot was quiet again, too quiet. I turned off the lobby lights and stepped back into the office, the floor creaking under my boots. The air felt different now, thinner. My safe place wasn't safe anymore. They knew where to find me. They knew I wasn't going to fold. The first shot had been fired. The war was on. I sank into Dad's chair and pressed my fingers to my temples until the pounding in my head slowed. "Be smart," he'd written, "not brave, not stubborn, smart." I stared at the safe like it could answer me. If I was going to fight men like that, I needed more than stubbornness. I needed something they couldn't push around. I needed proof and protection. I needed leverage. The square of metal in the wall seemed to pulse in the dim light as if it held one more breath left in it. I pulled the chair back and knelt in front of the open safe again, the cool concrete pressing through my jeans. I'd already taken the big envelope, but the boxy space didn't look full. I ran my fingers along the inside edges, then flattened my hand against the bottom and pushed. Something moved barely, a give like a floorboard under a hidden hinge. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the desktop and slid it into the thin seam where the safe's bottom met the sides. I angled it and pried, slow and careful. The metal lip lifted with a faint scrape. Underneath the false bottom was a slim, dust-coated envelope, the kind of off-white that only paper gets after years tucked away from light. My breath stuck in my throat as I pinched the corner and pulled it free. The flap was sealed with a strip of yellowed tape. I ran my finger under it and heard it crackle as it let go. Inside was a stack of documents clipped together. The words on the top page made my heart thud against my ribs. Declaration of the Walker Living Trust. Dad's name. My name. The date 5 years ago, exactly when his health had taken that first dip and he'd started moving slower, thinking 2 steps ahead of everyone else. I skimmed, then slowed, reading line by line until the meaning sank in. He'd put the station, the back lot, and everything under it into a living trust. Not just the business, not just the building. The ground and the stuff beneath the ground. He'd picked one person to be in charge of all of it, the one person who could make decisions and sign papers and block transfers and say no when push came to shove. He'd picked me. My shoulders dropped. I hadn't realized I'd been holding them up around my ears until they started to ache. I read the part about how any attempt to sell or change ownership without the trustee would get flagged and reported. I read the part that said his will didn't control any of it because this came first. The will reading had been for show or maybe for my brother's benefit. The real muscle was right here in my hands. A strange sound bubbled up out of me, some quiet mix of a breathy laugh and a sob. Relief hit me first, washing through me like warm water, then something colder slid in behind it, anger, clean and razor-sharp. Cole had sent his legal threats as if this was a coin flip he could win. Brandon had walked in here thinking I was a cornered animal. Dad had already closed the door behind them 5 years ago. He'd locked it and put the key around my neck. I sat there on the floor and took out my phone. I snapped photos of every page, my palms steadying as I went. Then I slid the papers back into the envelope and tucked it under the desk blotter for now. I'd make copies later, hide them, share them with Mark, whatever it took. The trust was my shield, solid and quiet, but a shield only keeps you from getting cut. I needed something that would cut back. I stared at the red star on the filing cabinet, that tiny splash of color that had started all of this. Important family history. History wasn't just receipts and maps. History could also be the choices people made when they thought no one was watching. I stood and yanked open every drawer, one after another, metal screeching, the smell of old paper blooming out like dust. I pulled everything out. Rubber-banded stacks of receipts, envelopes with faded return addresses, a broken stapler, a handful of bolts. I sorted the way Dad taught me, keep moving, don't overthink, your fingers will know what to look for. I shook out file folders and ran my hands inside the empty drawers, my nails scraping grit. Nothing. I dropped to my knees and bent low, peering into the back of the bottom drawer where the red star was. In the shadow, something looked off. I slid the drawer all the way out and set it on the floor. The cavity left behind was a shallow metal box with dust lining the corners like fur. I brushed it with my sleeve and my knuckles tapped something not quite flat. I pressed. The thin sheet flexed, taped under the very bottom, so flat I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't been on my stomach, was a manila folder wrapped in plastic, edges crusted with dust. I worked my fingers under the tape and tugged until it let go with a sticky snap. The folder was surprisingly heavy. I pulled it into the light and peeled off the plastic. On the tab in Dad's blocky print were 2 words, highway reroute. My stomach turned cold. I slid the papers out. On top were photocopies from town council meetings, the pages numbered and stamped. Behind them, clippings from the local newspaper, edges crinkled, headlines circled in red ink. Public input sought on state highway realignment. New route could boost north side growth. I spread them on the desk. Notes in Dad's hand ran down the margins, names underlined, arrows pointing to dates. Halfway down the pile, a photocopied page stopped me cold. It was meeting minutes from 12 years ago. There, in black ink, was a list of attendees and speakers. Under advisory committee presentations, a name popped like a slap. Brandon Walker, community development consultant. In the summary, someone had typed, Walker presents case for northern alignment, citing development potential, traffic flow, and reduced impact to future growth zones. I reached for the next clipping with trembling hands. It had a photo, my brother, younger, grinning awkwardly in a too-big blazer, pointing at a map. The caption read, Local consultant champions northern route. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I didn't have to read the rest to know what it said. He'd pushed for the route that cut this station out of the lifeline of traffic and pushed business to the other side of town, right toward the land he and his friends could build on. I stared at the photo until the edges went blurry, then shut my eyes and saw it anyway. Dad sitting at this very desk, reading the same lines, circling the same names. He'd known. He'd found this out and chosen not to tell me, or maybe he'd tried and couldn't bring himself to do it. Either way, he'd tucked it away for me to find when I was strong enough to look. The paper felt like ice against my skin. I shuffled through page after page, minutes and clippings and emails someone had printed out, public comments, bland statements, maps with colored lines. Over and over, Brandon's name threaded through, neat as a stitch. It all clicked together like gears finding teeth. The timing lined up in a neat, ugly row. 12 years ago, Brandon had stood at a microphone and talked about growth and flow, smiling as he drew a line on a map that bent 2 miles away from our pumps. The year after, Dad stopped stocking certain brands because the orders were too big for what we were selling. Then he let the night shifts go, then he took out a loan, then another. He started sleeping on the couch in the office when the days ran long. He told me not to worry, he told me we'd make it work. All the while he kept surveying the back lot, checking, double-checking, building a future underground while the surface was starving. Brandon hadn't just been opportunistic after Dad died. He'd wrapped his hands around the station's throat years before and squeezed, slow and careful, so no one would notice until it was too late. He'd planned to come in after, throw a few bills at me, and pick up the deed to land he already knew was worth more than anything he'd ever built. He must have slept better at night by telling himself it was just business. It wasn't. It was betrayal with a smile. I thought of Mom's funeral, the way Brandon had stood beside me with his arms stiff around my shoulders, his suit smelling like expensive soap, murmuring about family first. I heard Cole's nice, tidy voice offering the family rate to liquidate the only thing that still felt like home. My last hope that maybe they just didn't understand, maybe they were blind but not cruel, burned out like a match. I set the papers in a clean stack, squared the edges, then pressed my palm flat on top of them until the bones in my hand ached. The trust papers were my shield. This was my sword. Cold, simple facts that didn't care about suits or billboards or how loud someone could shout. I could picture it now, the map on a screen, the minutes blown up where any pair of eyes could read them, a reporter's pen ready to move. I didn't know yet exactly how I'd swing it, but I knew I would. The truth would do the cutting for me. I wiped the corner of my eye with my sleeve, angry that there were still tears left. Then I slid the folder back into its plastic, taped it to the underside of the drawer again, and pushed the drawer home with a firm shove. I stood in the quiet, listening to the buzz of the Coke cooler, the distant hiss of the highway like a ghost snake in the grass. "Smart, not loud," I whispered to the empty room. "Smart." I turned off the office light and stood a second in the dim, letting my eyes adjust. The station felt different now, not just a place to mourn, not just a battleground. A vault, a record, a living, breathing witness. My father had known who I was, he'd known who my brothers were, he'd trusted me to do what needed to be done. I tucked the key ring in my pocket and headed for the door, flicking the deadbolt as I left. The metal clicked. This time, the sound didn't scare me, it sounded like a promise. 2 days later, a white van with a magnetic sign on the door pulled up and a man in a blazer stepped out like he was delivering a wedding dress. He carried a thick legal envelope with my name typed in neat black letters and had me sign on a little screen. The paper felt heavy as a brick. I carried it into the office and sat on Dad's chair. For a second, I just held it, my thumb rubbing across the sealed flap until the glue warmed. I tore it open. The first page had a title that made my stomach drop. Notice of intent to challenge trust validity. I read the words twice, then a third time, hoping they'd change. They didn't. The lines jumped out at me like sharp fishhooks. They claimed Dad wasn't of sound mind when he set up the trust 5 years ago. They claimed I had influenced him, that I'd taken advantage of him when he was sick. I had to set the pages down because my hands were shaking. It was a pile of lies dressed up in official language. Cole's law firm letterhead stared back at me, cold and tidy. In my head, I could hear his careful voice explaining it like it was nothing personal, just business. I flipped to the last page and felt like I'd been punched. Until it was all sorted out, everything in the trust was on hold, stuck, frozen. I pictured Dad at this desk fighting to pay the bills, and now me, trapped by my own brother's words. I got up and paced the tiny office, the old floor tiles clicking under my boots. Somewhere in the store, the cooler kicked on and hummed like a low groan. The air tasted like dust and old coffee. I pressed my fingers to my eyelids until stars flashed, then dropped them and stared down at the pages again. They didn't just want the land, they wanted to bury me in paper so deep I'd never crawl out. I slid the packet back into the envelope and wrote in big letters across the front, "Lies." It was petty, but it made me feel like I had a little power. Then I propped it up against the safe and sat there on the floor, my back to the cool wall, and let myself be mad. Not loud, just steady. I was done being surprised by how low they'd go. I still had to figure out how to fight it. The next morning, my phone rang before the sun finished coming up. Unknown number, I answered anyway. A woman with a smooth voice said she was calling from the bank. She sounded apologetic in a way that told me she wasn't sorry at all. They'd received a copy of the legal notice. Because of the dispute, they were freezing my line of credit. Also the business account. For now, she said, like she was doing me a favor. I swallowed. So I can't borrow and I can't withdraw. I'm afraid not. I thanked her because manners are habits and hung up. Then I stared at the ceiling for a long minute while my brain made the slow turn from shock to the next problem. Payroll was on Friday. Luke and Mia were counting on me. Luke had a little sister he helped support. Mia was trying to save up for classes at the community college. I opened my personal bank app and did the math in my head. If I paid them, I'd have a few dollars left and not much else. If I didn't, I'd become exactly what my brothers said I was, someone who couldn't handle it. I grabbed my keys and walked out to the store. The morning light slanted through the front windows in pale stripes, picking out the dust in the air. I could smell the faint sweetness of old candy and the sour bite of coffee grounds in the trash. I made a pot of coffee anyway, just to hear it gurgle. While it dripped, I called the bank back to ask for a manager. I begged a little. I told her about Luke and Mia. I told her this wasn't a trick, it was my family playing dirty. She was polite and she said all the things people say when they can't help you. Our hands are tied, it's out of my control. We both knew what it meant. I hung up and set both my hands flat on the counter, palms down, like I was trying to steady a table with a wobble. My biggest fear crept up from the floor and wrapped around my ribs, this awful whisper that maybe I really wasn't smart enough. Maybe I was just a girl who knew how to change a timing belt and nothing else. I could almost hear Brandon's laugh and see Cole's small, tidy smile. I poured a coffee and carried it out to the garage, set it by the lift, and tried to give myself a normal problem to solve. I found a cracked hose on an old mower someone had left and cut a new piece to fit. The whine of the blade when it finally started made my eyes sting. I sat down on a stack of tires and took out my phone to text Luke and Mia. "Checks will be late," I typed, then erased it. "Can you swing Friday?" I typed, then erased that too. I couldn't hit send on anything, not yet. I'd pay them somehow. I'd sell my tools before I stiffed them. Just before lunch, a delivery truck rumbled past on the road to the east, heading for the highway I could barely see through the pines. I watched the top of it flash in the gaps and felt smaller than I had in years. The station had always made me feel strong. Today, it felt like a hollow shell. By late afternoon, the light in the office was too dim to read by and I didn't flip the switch. Saving power felt like something I could control. I spread the notices across the desk, tax letters, the legal challenge, the bank's email on my cracked phone screen, and stared at them until the words ran together. I felt like I was drowning in paper and every page was a hand on my shoulder pushing me down. For about a minute, maybe a little more, I let myself think about calling Brandon and taking the $500,000 offer. I pictured signing, the rush of relief, the sleep I might finally get. I pictured the look on his face, smug, forgiving, like he'd rescued me from myself. The thought made my skin crawl. I turned my head and saw the folder with the highway clippings on the corner of the desk, the red circles around his name like little wounds. Giving up meant he got away with it. Giving up meant Dad's years of careful planning were for nothing. I slid my hand over the folder and felt the ridges of the paper under my palm. "No," I said out loud into the dim. The word sounded thin at first, then grew teeth. I sat up straighter. If I couldn't beat them in a courtroom with money I didn't have, I could beat them somewhere they didn't control. They wanted to make this a pile of papers. I'd make it a story. I picked up the phone and called Cole first. He answered on the second ring, brisk. "Jenna, I want a final family meeting," I said. My voice didn't shake. "At your office tomorrow, we'll discuss a resolution." "Bring Brandon?" There was a pause, then a smile in his tone. "Good, I'll set the time. Bring your friends from Easton Ridge," I added. "If they care so much, they should hear it." Another pause, heavier. "I'll see what I can do. Do more than that," I said and hung up. Then I scrolled to Dana Porter's number. I'd only met her once at a community event, but her stories were sharp and fair. She picked up with a quick hello. "Dana, this is Jenna Walker. I have a story for you. Highway reroute, a developer, family conflict. I need you to be at Cole Walker's office tomorrow in the lobby 15 minutes after I go in." "Do I walk in?" she asked, voice bright but careful. "If I don't come out," I said, "bring your notepad and your camera." She was quiet for a second. "I'll be there." After I hung up, I texted Mark. "I need a short letter, 1 page in plain English. Confirm what you told me about the gas. I'll pick it up in the morning." His reply came fast. "Done." I put fresh batteries in my small recorder and tucked it into my bag. I pressed a clean shirt and laid it across the chair. I pulled the trust papers and the reroute folder and set them in a neat stack. I stuck a pink sticky note on the top with 2 words, "Be calm." I didn't sleep much. When I did, I dreamed of Dad in the office, his hand on the wall, tapping until he found the hollow sound. He turned and looked at me with that small smile of his and said, "You've got this, kid." The next afternoon, I walked into the conference room at Cole's law firm. It could have been the twin of the room where the will was read: wide table, leather chairs, a bowl of green apples in the center that looked like they'd never been touched. The air conditioning was set too low. Cold air washed over my arms and raised goosebumps. I smelled that sharp, clean scent courts and banks love, the kind that makes you feel like you should lower your voice. Brandon, Cole, Victor Hale, and Nate Collins were already there. Brandon lounged in his chair like a bored cat. Cole was flipping through a folder with tabs, neat as ever. Victor Hale sat straight-backed at the end, his suit so dark it soaked up the light. Nate watched me like I was a math problem he meant to solve. Their faces said I was late to my own surrender. I wore my work jeans and a clean navy shirt. I didn't bother with a blazer. I wasn't going to pretend to be someone I wasn't. I carried a slim black briefcase Dad had once used when he tried to look official for a bank meeting. The handle was smooth from years of hands. Inside, I had Mark's letter, the trust, the reroute folder, and a pen. That was all I needed. "Thank you all for coming," I said and set the briefcase on the table in front of me. My voice sounded steady, even to me. I could feel the tiny recorder in my pocket, warm against my thigh. I could also feel the weight of my phone in my back pocket, the one with Dana's number on the top of the list. She was in the lobby just like we'd agreed, flipping her notepad open and closed, waiting. I glanced up at the wall clock. I had told her to come in if I wasn't out in 15 minutes. The second hand ticked, slow and loud. Brandon leaned back and put one ankle on his knee, showing off a sock with tiny dollar signs woven into the fabric. He didn't mean to, but I saw them and almost laughed. "Let's get this over with, Jenna," he said. "We have the papers ready, just sign and this can all be done." Victor slid a check across the table like a card in a cheap magic trick. The number flashed up at me, $500,000. The paper was crisp, the ink blue and bold. It might as well have been Monopoly money. I didn't touch it. I didn't even look down again. I kept my eyes on their faces, one at a time. "I appreciate you all making time," I said. The words were polite, but there was steel underneath. Cole's jaw flexed. Nate's pen hovered over his legal pad, waiting. Victor Hale's expression didn't change at all. He was a man used to winning with his face. In my head, I could see the lobby, the glass doors, Dana's ponytail, the bright light outside. I wasn't locked in this room, not really. The clock said 13 minutes left. That was enough. I clicked open the briefcase and felt Dad's photo tucked inside the side pocket brush my fingers. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. I already knew what he'd say. Be smart, be strong, keep your hands steady. "First," I said, "let's clear up a few things." I pulled the first stack of papers from the briefcase and set them in the center of the table. These are my dad's trust papers. 5 years ago, he put the station, the back lot, and everything under it into this trust. He made me the one in charge, not Brandon, not Cole, me. Cole leaned in. I watched his eyes move over the first page, then the signatures at the back. The color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He knew what it meant. I didn't give anyone time to recover. I slid the next paper forward, a single page with Mark's letterhead at the top. This is a letter from Mark Ruiz. He's the county environmental engineer. He checked my dad's survey and confirmed a natural gas deposit under our land. It's real, it's large, he put a number on it. I tapped the line halfway down the page. At least $50 million in rights, that's the floor, not the ceiling. Victor Hale's professional smile broke for the first time. A muscle ticked near his eye. Nate sat very still, but his pen made a tiny mark on his pad like his hand had moved on its own. Brandon looked at the letter like it was written in a language he'd never seen before. I let the weight of it hang in the cold air. The clock ticked behind me. The bowl of apples in the middle of the table looked fake, too green to be real. My voice stayed level. So when you slid that check at me, Victor, you weren't making an offer. You knew it was worth 100 times that. You were trying to rush me. That's not a deal, that's a trick. Victor folded his hands on the table and didn't answer. The silence felt different now. It didn't belong to them anymore. Cole cleared his throat like he wanted to find his old footing. Jenna, he started. Even if, no, I said, and he shut his mouth. I pointed at the trust again. Your challenge is nothing. Dad signed this when he was clear. You know it, you know you can't break it. His eyes flicked to Brandon, then down to his folder. He didn't argue, he didn't even try. That told me everything. I leaned back. I could feel the small recorder warm through the denim of my pocket. I thought of Dana in the lobby and felt my heartbeat settle into a steady rhythm. Here's what's true, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I control this land. I control what happens to it, and I won't sell to you. The power in the room shifted like a truck changing lanes. I didn't have to push. I just had to hold the wheel steady while they realized I was the one driving. But this has never really been about the money, I said, softer now. I reached into the briefcase and brought out the last folder. The manila edges were worn and soft from my hands. I opened it and slid the first clipping across to Brandon. The headline was big and bold, even in black and white. Local businessman champions Northern Highway route. Under it was a photo of Brandon 12 years younger, smiling too wide in a cheap blazer, pointing at a map. His fingers stalled on the edge of the paper. He didn't pick it up. You sat on the advisory committee, I said. I kept my tone even, but I felt the anger rise in my chest like heat. You pushed for the route that you knew would pull traffic away from our station. You called it growth. You called it good for the north side. You knew what it would do to Dad. Cole's head turned toward his brother like it had been pulled by a string. He looked at the picture, then at Brandon's face, and something in his own expression cracked. I slid the next page across, a copy of the meeting notes. His name underlined, his words printed and plain, then another, an email summary. Then another, the map with the colored lines, the northern loop, a neat arc that skipped our pumps and our sign and our whole life by 2 miles. You strangled his livelihood, I said. My voice shook on the last word and I let it. I wanted them to hear what it did to me to say it out loud. You watched him work himself to the bone. You watched him sell tools to pay light bills. You watched him take out loans to pay his guys. You watched him get sick. And you waited. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. He stared down at the clipping like it might change if he glared hard enough. It didn't. Why? I asked. I wasn't shouting. It was worse than shouting. The question came out small and raw, the kind of question you ask when you still want to believe there's a decent answer. Why would you do that to Dad? He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. He looked at his younger self on the page, frozen with a grin that now looked like a mask, and he couldn't find a single thing to say. The door opened without a knock. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I saw the way Victor flinched just a little and the way Cole straightened in his chair. Sorry to interrupt, Dana said, her voice bright and calm. "I was told there might be a comment on Easton Ridge's development plans and a possible ethics issue involving a highway reroute." She stepped in with her notepad held like a tray. The little pen tucked behind her ear was the only piece of color in the room besides the fake apples. The clock over the door ticked once more. My 15 minutes were up. Victor stood like he'd been stung. His chair scraped loud against the wood. "Our offer is withdrawn," he said. He looked at Nate and made a small, sharp gesture. "We're done." "Not so fast," I said. My voice stopped them in the doorway. They all looked at me, even Dana, though her pen kept moving. "I know your company doesn't want your name on this," I said to Victor. "You made that clear the second she walked in." I nodded toward Dana. "Fine, it won't be. But I am taking a partner, it just won't be you." I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a single sheet I'd typed the night before on Dad's old computer. The edges were a little crooked where I'd cut them by hand, and I didn't care. "Here are my terms," I said. "I'll partner with an independent operator. The split is 68 to me, 32 to them. They carry all the startup costs. We hire local. We fix the road in and out of the site. We set up real safety rules and Mark Ruiz oversees them. Every step, every test, in writing." Victor's mouth tightened. "You think you can dictate too?" "I'm not dictating," I said. "I'm offering. And I'm offering you one thing, a chance to save face by making an introduction. You have contacts you trust. You don't get a cut. You don't get a say. You just hand over a name and step out of the way." Nate's eyes flicked to Victor, then to the reporter. He could count the angles as well as I could. The story looked bad already. It would look worse if they tried to bully me in front of a notepad. I tapped the reroute folder with my finger. "You have 24 hours to accept my terms and give me a name. If you don't, this goes to every paper in the state and I sit down with Dana and tell her everything. The photos, the minutes, the offers, the check." Brandon finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. "Jenna," I looked at him and felt something break and fall away in me. I would never again see him as the big brother who knew better. "No," I said, "you don't get to shape this." "Not anymore." I slid the paper of terms across the table to no one in particular, then closed my briefcase. The latch clicked like a tiny door shutting in a quiet house. "This isn't a negotiation," I said. "It's a decision." "Yours?" No one stopped me when I stood. No one reached for my arm. I walked past Victor, past Nate, past my brothers, and nodded to Dana. "Lobby," I said. She smiled a little. "Lobby," she said, and stepped aside to let me pass. Word travels faster than a holler on a downhill. By the next morning, people at the diner were already whispering. By lunch, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. It was Victor's assistant, voice tight. "Easton Ridge would not be involved further," she said, "but they could connect me with an independent operator named Gavin Pierce. He ran a regional outfit. Good reputation, hard hat instead of a billboard. He could be at my station at 3. He showed up 5 minutes early in a dusty truck and work boots with ground and dirt. He shook my hand like a person who had actually used his hands that day. He listened more than he talked. He read Mark's letter and didn't flinch. He looked at the back lot through the pines and nodded once like he could already see the path. "I can work with your terms," he said. "We'll handle the setup costs. We'll hire local. We'll put Mark in charge of the safety checks and the tests. We won't cut corners." "You okay with 68 to me?" I asked. He laughed, short and honest. "If the land's yours and the rights are yours, then yeah." "You're the boss?" We shook on it. By dinner, we had a short agreement on paper. By the end of the week, he wired an advance enough to breathe. The first thing I did was walk into the bank and pay off the line of credit. I liked the look on the teller's face when I slid the receipt back across the counter. The second thing I did was call Luke and Mia and tell them to come in early the next day. We ripped down the mildewed cloth from the front windows and let in the light. We tossed broken racks and stained mats into a dumpster that thudded when each piece hit. We mopped until the water turned black, then changed the water and mopped again. We scrubbed the counter until it shined. I ordered a new neon transformer and sent the old sign to a guy in town who loved restoring them. He sent me pictures as he worked, each letter slowly waking up. The rigs rolled in after the snow melted, long silhouettes easing through the pines like steel whales. Their engines hummed beyond the trees, steady and low, like a long breath out. The first time I heard them start up, I had to step outside and stand in the sun just to feel the warmth on my face. It sounded like a future. I used part of the advance to buy Luke a toolbox with his name stamped on the top and to put Mia on full-time with benefits. I gave them both raises. When Mia saw her new rate on the printed sheet, she covered her mouth and said my name like a question. "You earned it," I said, "and we're just getting started." That night, we painted the front of the station a clean, sharp white and cut in the trim with red. When the neon came home, the guy hung it while we held our breath. He flipped a switch and the letters warmed to life one by one, WALKER, until the whole sign glowed against the dark. It felt like Dad had just stepped into the room. A few months later, the station smelled like fresh paint and new tires and coffee. The rigs were deeper in the trees, doing their slow, careful work, and the town had started to feel that hum in their bones. The county posted the notice that they were opening an ethics review into Brandon's role in the highway reroute. The chair, Eleanor Bates, stood on the courthouse steps and said the words into a microphone, and I watched it on my phone with the sound turned up. Brandon lost a big contract he'd chased for a year. He stopped posting photos of himself on the golf course. Cole called me one afternoon and sounded like a different person. No edge, no small smile, no tidy tone. "Jenna," he said, voice low, "you were right. The trust is as tight as they come." I told Brandon to stand down. He swallowed audibly. "I'm sorry. I didn't have forgiveness ready to go, but I had space." "Thank you for telling me," I said. It was a start. The day my brothers finally came to the station, they didn't pull in with their chest-out cars. They stepped out of a plane rental. Their suits looked like clothes, not armor. They stood on the cracked pavement and stared up at the sign like they weren't sure they were allowed to look. They had rehearsed words in their mouths. I could see them trying to line them up. Brandon's eyes were rimmed red like he'd slept badly for weeks. Cole kept smoothing his tie even though it didn't need it. "I'm sorry," Brandon said first. 2 words heavy as a full can. They hit the ground and rolled between us. Cole nodded. "I am too." I didn't let them off the hook by making it easy. I let the silence stretch so they could hear it and maybe remember it. The station door creaked in the breeze behind me. Somewhere in the trees, a rig shifted gears with a soft groan. "My victory cost me you," I said. I didn't say it to hurt them. I said it so they'd know the shape of the hole they'd dug. But the family I had before was built on lies and being talked over. If we're going to build anything new, it has to be different. They both nodded like the same thought had crossed their minds and gotten stuck. "I'm not inviting you back into control," I said. "That door is closed. But if you want to help without steering, if you want to try, there's a place for you as advisors only. No votes, no backseat driving. You sit at the table and listen more than you talk." I let that settle, then added the price. "And there's a condition: you both fund a scholarship, $500,000. For kids in this town who want to go into the trades or environmental work like Mark's. Real money, real chances, no names on buildings, you don't get credit. You just do it." Brandon winced like I'd asked for a part of him. Cole did the math behind his eyes. They both looked up at the sign again. The red letters hummed steady. "Okay," Brandon said. The word sounded like it hurt and healed at the same time. "We'll do it," Cole nodded. "We'll set it up," he said, then caught himself and added, "We'll pay for it." I didn't hug them. I didn't invite them inside, not yet. I pointed to the picnic table we'd dragged out back under the pine tree. "We can sit over there," I said. "We can start with coffee." We sat with paper cups and listened to the low engine hum past the trees. They asked me questions instead of telling me what to do. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small sitting next to them. I felt like the person I'd become, the one who'd drawn a line and kept it, the one Dad had believed I'd be when he wrote my name on an envelope and hid it in a wall. I stand behind the counter Dad built, the wood worn smooth by years of elbows and coffee cups. It smells like fresh paint, new rubber, and dark roast. The bell above the door dings every time someone steps in: rig workers in dusty jackets, old-timers from town, kids with wide eyes who point at the neon. Luke keeps a steady rhythm of mugs and jokes, and Mia runs the register like it's a game she's beating. She taped a handwritten sign by the coffee pots, hot and honest. It makes people smile. The neon outside hums steady. Walker's service glows red against the evening sky, a name that feels bigger now, not just a place to fill up, but the heart of something we're building. Through the window, I can see the road we fought for: smooth new asphalt, bright lines, no more potholes rattling your bones. A breeze slips through the crack of the door and brings the faint sound of engines from beyond the trees. It's a low, patient music, the rigs working, not rushing, just doing their careful job. Mark Ruiz leans on the counter and shows a photo from his phone. Another test done, another green light. He takes his coffee black. Gavin Pierce steps in with a quick nod and tracks mud on the mat. He apologizes for the mess, but I don't mind. Dirt means work. Behind him, the last of the sun catches the side of a tanker pulling in slow, a clean white curve with bold letters: Walker Energy, rolling along the new road like it belongs there. I glance at the picture frame tucked beside the register, the one of 16-year-old me grinning with grease on my cheeks. Dad wrote the date on the back. I press my thumb against the glass and feel that old joy rise up, simple and strong. I still have grease under my nails today, but that's my choice. I like the proof that I'm not just pointing at maps. I'm turning wrenches, signing papers, and pouring coffee. I'm the person Dad believed I could be. The tanker eases past as the neon kicks brighter against the dusk. A couple of little kids press their hands to the window to watch it go. Their mom laughs and says, "That's us, honey." "That's our town." I swallow and nod like she said it to me too. I step outside with my mug and look up at the sign. The red letters hum, steady as a heartbeat. Dad's plan wasn't loud, mine isn't either. It's the quiet, sure sound of an engine after you've fixed it right, the kind you trust to carry you the whole way home. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's staying put, doing the work, and outlasting the folks who counted you out. Have you ever had to prove someone wrong? Tell me about it in the comments, and hit subscribe for more stories like this one.